Being understood. What is understanding? I understand. You understand. I feel understood. You feel understood. There is understanding. There is understanding as evidenced by what? How do we determine what is a sufficient understanding? Do you understand how a car works? Most people who can drive a car will say, yes, I understand how a car works. You put the key in the ignition, you turn it, you operate the pedals, the wheel in front of you, and off you go. I know how a car works. Okay, well, how does a catalytic converter work? I don't know. Then you don't know how a car works, right? Okay, well, then you ask the mechanic, how does a catalytic converter work? Well, it works by, well, I don't know how it works. So like I'll say, what is it? It's some sort of air scrubber, so some sort of air filtration system. Okay, well, the mechanic knows how the car works. He understands how the car works because he can explain how the catalytic converter works. And then, well, how does the filtration system work? The mechanic goes, I don't know. I just order it from a company and they bring it and it does the job that it says it's supposed to do. Okay, so the mechanic doesn't know how a car works. He doesn't know how the catalytic converter works because he doesn't know how the filtration system works. Okay, you ask the manufacturing company, how does your filtration system work? And well, how do you ask the filtration company? What does it mean to ask a filtration company how their filters work? Ideally, you get some sort of technical person on the line, but who knows who you're going to get when you call. What does it mean to say that a company understands anything if a company is comprised of individual people? Individual people with an understanding of how their products work that's different from each individual within the company. You can say in aggregate, the sum total of people are going to have a better idea of how their filtration system works than some other source. But we can play the same game that we just played with the car and the mechanic and ask, well, how does their filtration system work? And they might say something like, well, we have a very fine-grained mesh that only allows certain things through and not others. It might be mechanical in nature. There might be some sort of chemical constituents in it that bind to particular molecules that run through the filtration system. And then you can ask the same question. Well, how does the binding work? How do these molecules walk through the system? And why do some of them stay and some don't? What is it that's going on there? Well, you have chemical bonds. You have charge within these molecules, and depending on how the charge is distributed throughout the molecule, it will or will not bind to another molecule. So you can strategically set up systems such that the molecules that you want to bind, and the ones that you don't want to bind continue through, unless you filter. How does the binding work? What is going on in that binding? And now all of a sudden we're talking about like quantum mechanics. We're talking about something that is at the very cutting edge of physics at this time. And nobody agrees. Well, people agree, but there is no scientific consensus on how this stuff works. Nobody knows the interpretation that's best suited to explain what's really going on within quantum mechanics. And so the filtration system people can't say they know how the filtration system works. They don't know how quantum mechanics works. Quantum physicists don't know how quantum physics works. But of course, you go talk to academic departments about quantum physics and physics departments, and they're going to know more about quantum physics than other institutions. And so you ask somebody within that department, again, what does it mean for a department to know anything? A department is comprised of people with different ideas about how quantum mechanics works. And you're going to get different answers depending on which departments you go to, depending on which person you ask. And so, what does it mean to say that you understand how quantum physics works? Well, I think most quantum physicists would say nobody understands how it works, or our ideas of how it works are continuing to refine. There's somebody who has a better understanding than others. They typically have the letters PhD in front of their name. The point is, when you want to say, I understand how quantum physics works, when I understand how something works, without a context, without a reasonable means of adducing that you understand, there is no such thing as understanding. You cannot say you understand something without a context. We say we understand how a car works because of the standard that I wish to go to the grocery store. And if I didn't understand how a car works, I wouldn't be able to get to the grocery store. So because I know how a car works, I can get to the grocery store. The evidence of my understanding is found in my ability to go to the grocery store with the car. Therefore, I understand how a car works. I don't know how a car works. I can't repair a car. A mechanic, though, a mechanic understands how a car works, as evidenced by the fact that you can bring your car to a mechanic and they will repair the symptoms. They will make it function. Therefore, they understand how the car works, as evidenced by the standard of the goal of fixing the car. Understanding something is with respect to a particular goal. That's what we mean by understanding. So when we're just trying to understand the universe around us, and we might use that context of the universe and try to understand it, that doesn't have a goal, right? Because like the universe doesn't exist within a space for which it could be useful for something else, because that something else is, by definition of the universe, or cosmos, whatever, is contained within the universe. The universe doesn't exist in a context. So what does it mean to say you understand the universe? What does it mean to say you understand anything within here? Without a context, there is no standard by which you can say, I understand the universe. You can't use the universe to get to the grocery store. You can't use the universe to achieve a goal, because all goals are contained within the universe. Goals are a function of the universe. So what does it mean to say, what is understanding without a context? It is the attempt to understand the universe. We can narrow the scope down to an academic field, to a car, to a filtration system. Which I'm gonna have to look that up. I'm not gonna do it now, but I'm gonna have to look that up to even see if the catalytic converter does some form of filtration. We'll see. To say you understand something, you have to narrow the scope down from a contextless context, whatever the hell that means, to a context within some other context. We have to narrow the scope we have to narrow it into a system by which we can say what succeeds as an understanding and what does not. Otherwise, we have no means or methods of deciding what is or is not an understanding, whether or not somebody does or does not understand something. I submit that philosophy is contextless. It has no context until you define it. And once you define it, you're doing philosophy. You are narrowing the scope of the contextless. Like philosophy is contextless. It is the universe on some level. It is the space in which you can say anything is anything else or related to anything else, to define what a thing is, to define that there even is a universe here to be talked about, to define what understanding is. That's all philosophy. Philosophy to me is the beginning of the hierarchy of everything. And then you might want to try to define stuff that's not philosophy. And I'm just going to say that's more philosophy. That's more categorization. That is more assigning labels to things and saying this is this and that is that. And these are how they're related or not related. And that's philosophy. That's conceptualization. That's utilizing the parts of the brain associated with abstract thinking to make sense, just pure making sense or making sense of something. That makes it philosophy. So I took my car the other day and drove to the grocery store. That's philosophy. That's a statement. That's associating a concept of myself, a car, a grocery store, into a syntax that pretends to be related in ways that pretends to exist in ways that it doesn't in fact exist, right? Like there is no car here. There's just the concept of a car that I just brought up, but there is no car. And the memory, there's some form of fuzzy memory going on here, but like the act of going to the grocery store in a car is not currently going on right now. That's a made up conceptual framework that isn't here. So those are concepts. The conceptual framework is the story. I went to the store the other day in a car. That's philosophy. To disagree that everything is philosophy is philosophy. Philosophy pretends to be a system within itself, as though it is a separate domain from everything else, so that you can find the building on your campus, you know? It pretends to be a particular discipline within the academic community, but the reality is that the underlying structure of every academic discipline is philosophy. It all starts with philosophy. Everything is philosophy. And if you just accept that fact as a starting point, then we can start defining structures that that are weird, that sound weird. Like within philosophy, we can talk about different academic disciplines like math, physics, and philosophy. There's a category of philosophy underneath the one and only category of philosophy. And that might sound weird, but this is what's awesome about concepts. What's awesome about philosophy is that there is no bound to how we name things, how we conceptualize about things. Sets can contain themselves. Philosophy can pretend to be a subsection of everything else while in fact actually being the whole. Because this is a function, a capacity that conceptualization has. So our English language is going to sound like weird thing. It's going to make weird sounds. It's going to make weird sentences like philosophy is everything, and philosophy is also a subdivision of philosophy. Uh, but it makes perfect sense when understood that regardless of whatever we're doing, however we cut up the pie, however we make sense or label stuff, say this is this and that is that, and however we name the buildings on our university campuses, uh, to tie everything together with a word like philosophy is very useful. It is a starting point that can help any sort of inquiry into anything. Because once you do that, then you're no longer balkanizing your what you consider to be relevant or irrelevant information. You're no longer relegating your domain of inquiry to a particular discipline like biology or something, and creating imaginary conceptual lines between what is and is not biology, and deciding somebody's asking a question on the other side of that boundary, therefore I do not need to investigate. That is a waste of my time because that's not biology, and I'm a biologist and I only do biology. I have defined biology by these boundaries, and anything outside of that boundary is not my discipline and not something I need to engage with. And there's a lot of use in doing that. We, of course, don't want our biologists commenting on quantum physics. However, we do want our biologists commenting on quantum physics. We want them to comment on it with the caveats and disclaimers that everybody would want them to have, such as, I'm just a biologist and this is my basic understanding that molecules follow a wave probability distribution. They follow the Schrodinger equation. And those molecules comprise the atoms that make up animals, and all the biological functionings going on in that is a result of the interplay of these physical molecules doing whatever it is that they do. We want our biologists to be able to say something like that. And most biologists can say something like that. But many can't. Many do not take the full implications of physics into the biology lab. Well, so I don't know. I'm not as close to the research in biology right now to understand exactly what like typical. I don't know enough. I'm not a biologist. I don't know enough about biology to say what I'm about to say. But I do know enough about humans in general, and that there definitely are some biologists, there are definitely scientists who do this when they would be better served not doing this, and to maintain intellectual rigor while engaging in, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. What am I trying to say? I'm dancing around it. Maybe it'll be obvious when I watch this back. We want our biologists to be engaged in inquiry that is relevant to their disciplines. And we do not want them to not engage in those other disciplines on the basis of some conceptualized notions as to what counts as legitimate biological knowledge and what doesn't. Cutting themselves off from potentially relevant information because they've decided that it's not biology is harmful to the biological sciences. It is harmful to any domain of inquiry. It is harmful for anybody to decide such and such information is outside of anything I care about. You can't know that information that you don't know is outside of something that you care about because you don't know the information. We don't know how many unreported injuries go on in a workplace because they're unreported. I remember teachers when I was a kid used to say stuff like, when I'm in the room, be careful because I'm always watching. I got eyes in the back of my head. I catch everything you do. I see it all. I see you texting under the desk. I see it all. I know when you're doing it. So don't think that you're getting away with anything because I see it. And all I can think is, if you didn't see it, how would you know that you didn't see it? This is an epistemic issue with statements like that. And of course, the teacher is just trying to get kids to behave well, and they're not making some deep metaphysical claim. Although they're to make that claim, especially in an academic, a public school situation, where we are supposed to be engaged and inquiring carefully through whatever it is the topic of the day is. It's important that we do understand when we are making such a statement and what its limitations are. And I don't think that when that teacher was using that statement that they were fully aware of the implications. You can't know the use of something before you know how it works or what it does. You can't know the use of information until you know what that information is. And this is why education is so important. You don't know the value of an education until you have an education. So how do we decide what is and is not relevant information to a particular domain of inquiry? Well, you can't. But one way to soften the edges, one way to reduce this issue is to call on the broadest category of all domains of inquiry and call it philosophy. It's all philosophy. We can use philosophy as a starting point then for every domain of inquiry. And we can say, yes, we are in the classroom right now, we are in the lab even, and we are doing philosophy. And within philosophy, we have defined these conceptual structures as biology, math, science, biology, physics, all the different sciences, all the different arts. We have an art called philosophy. We have an art called just art. There's painting. There's film study. There's go to your favorite university's course catalog and different colleges within, and start listing those off. That's how we are conceptualizing these different structures. It's important to note, though, that all of that is philosophy. All of that is conceptualized, conceptual frameworks that we're utilizing to label buildings, to get students into the correct places, to direct them towards a particular domain of inquiry that they may find interesting. But certain questions within those domains of inquiry are going to be impossible to answer if it is confused that that domain of inquiry is within a broader picture of just generalized philosophy. There's certain depths that students will not be able to go to without recognizing that by convention, certain things are true within a discipline, and that those conventions are in fact conventions that are necessary for the functioning of the balkanized conceptual framework of their the balkanization of our different academic disciplines for the purpose of getting specialized knowledge and focus domains of inquiry. Do I have an example right now? I don't think so. The example is generic and abstract, but when you enter into these structures, they are operating from a set of assumptions that may or may not go inspected. And they can only go inspected if you step outside of the structure that you've started with. Certain questions within biology cannot go answered without a firm understanding of chemistry. Most, if not all, of today's biology, potentially. And so biology says this is the study of life. And there's definitions thrown around about what is considered alive and what isn't. But and like as we progress, I think it is noticed, or it's becoming more and more noticed, that these lines that we're defining between our different disciplines are blurred quite a bit. That there is no clean line between that which is alive and that which isn't. So I'm trying to think of an example, but I can kind of dance around one. If we're starting from the assumption that something is alive, it is either alive or it is not. And and we never investigate that which is not alive because we defined that we're the life sciences studies. We may fail to recognize that all life is made up of completely dead and inert matter. Dead as defined by biology as to what is or is not alive. So we set up this category of this being alive, this not being alive, and fail to go to the lower understanding that that which is alive is made up of dead. The lower constituents of life is death on some level. It's non-life. Starting from certain points of inquiry become needlessly difficult within the life sciences without that assumption. I guess a better way to proceed in this conversation is just to look at our look into the past of science and see how it's progressed and how certain assumptions that were made eventually became untenable because of new evidence that was produced. How certain conversations were made incredibly difficult because of these imaginary boundaries that we place around what is something, or what is considered biology and what isn't, what is considered chemistry and what isn't, what is blah, 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 blah. Okay. Everything is philosophy. Start from there. And then there is no more fraught conversations on this. We recognize that any conversation that we're having is just a process of generating a concept, putting it forth, assessing it on its own terms as it is, with no defined assumptions other than the assumptions that you have already agreed about or defined within the context of the conversation. And now we're often running, inspecting these very difficult and fraught issues within our different disciplines. We're inspecting them from a more sterile and assumption-free environment, allowing for further progress in the domain of inquiry that we care about. And that can only be done if we have some philosophical training, if we understand what we're doing when we are operating within the assumptions that we're operating, which is philosophy. It's all philosophy. if our education system starts with the rational structures that define the education systems themselves, that define what anything is, which is a domain of inquiry within philosophy, then we have the generalized space upon which every other the generalized space upon which every other concept is formed, which every other discipline is formed, and it becomes much, much easier to navigate certain issues. All issues, really. Every issue, because every issue is philosophy. It's an issue of philosophy at bottom. To define again what is not a philosophical issue, to say that no, this is an empirical issue or a lack of evidence issue or an engineering issue. That's also philosophy. What we're talking about is just we have not set up the proper conceptual framework in order to achieve the particular thing that we're trying to achieve. What's the thing we're trying to achieve? That again is another conceptualization, another piece of philosophy. The desire to achieve things, the want, the valuing of things, of something being reasonable or not reasonable is all philosophy. What is not philosophy? Well, if everything is philosophy, then nothing is philosophy, right? Yeah. So this is one of the weird things that our concepts do, right? Is I can say nothing is philosophy, and that is a positive claim about a concept called nothing. It's a conceptualization still. I'm still conceptualizing about something when I say nothing. I could say that this concept has no properties. It has the property of having no properties. Like concepts, rationality, these are useful tools. They're useful for navigating the world, for understanding the world in a contextless environment. That's what philosophy is. Everything we're doing is operating within a contextless environment. We design context. That's something that we're putting upon the universe, a context, a particular boundary upon which we decide this is legitimate and this is not legitimate. So what is not philosophy? And for this, I go to the Eastern philosophies, if you will. Non-conceptualization, which itself is a conceptualization. Let's just notice that I'm using a label here to talk about something that in order to give you the understanding that I'm trying to give you right now, I necessarily have to use concepts, words, the very thing I'm trying to say, the very thing that is not what I'm trying to talk about. If you see what I mean there. What is it that I'm trying to talk about? The very thing that is non-conceptual. Thing that is non-conceptual. There's no way to talk about what is non-conceptual. There's no way to conceptualize about that which is non-conceptual. And if you think that you do have the conceptualization of the non-conceptual, you do not have the conceptualization of the non-conceptual. Non-conceptual is that's what it is. You might ask, what is that? And now you're just asking for another concept to fill the space of whatever it is that you think that I just did. However it is that you understand what just happened. You're immediately reaching for another conceptualization, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid here by understanding what is non-conceptual. So we have to recognize the space in which understanding is occurring. What is understanding and what is not? And this ties back to the beginning of the conversation. Non-conceptualization. We can conceptualize about a hand motion. and talk about neurons in the brain and signals and muscular movements, ATP, chemical energy distribution throughout the system that leads to this motion. And we can say, I have a conceptual understanding about how all this works. Can I say I have a conceptual understanding about that, about how this works? Is conceptualization causing this? No. Before I had the conceptualization of neurons and muscles and ATP, I was able to do this, right? This was a function this happened before we had any ability to abstract away the world, which is kind of what I'm trying to do right now, is trying to get you, the viewer, to notice this distinction between an abstraction and what is in fact happening, and not through this lens of conceptualization. Conceptualization, neurons, fingers, arm, brain, chemicals, ATP. Non-conceptualization. So I understand how this hand works, but as we were talking about in the beginning, what does it mean to say that I understand how this hand works? Like, within what context? In the context that I know how to move it. As I just noted, it doesn't matter what that conceptual understanding is. I didn't need that conceptual understanding to move it. This goal was achieved independent of my conceptual understanding. So what does it mean to say I understand how my hand works? Clearly, it's not a conceptualization. It's not a conceptual notion that I understand how it works. It just do. I just do. So we can say I have a non-conceptual understanding of how my hand works. And you might say, well, that's not an understanding. Well, if your standard of understanding is that you need a conceptual explanation of each individual piece leading up to, well, I don't know, leading up to what? Leading up to how do we decide what is a sufficient understanding here if we're not going to accept that it's whether or not you achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve? As well, maybe you didn't accept it, but that was my definition in the very beginning of this video. We understand how a car works on the basis of our ability to drive to the store. That is one standard by which we would say, I understand how this car works. We do not have a corollary here for the movement of the hand. The movement of the hand happens. It just happens. It's just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. So maybe there's an issue here with this notion of there being an I separate and distinct from this hand, who is acting upon it, who is seeing it and being the one in control. Maybe there's a conceptualization in there that is unfounded. Maybe there isn't a self at all. Maybe there is just matter, just physics and motion. Conceptualization is a function of those physics. And the conceptualization of a self, independent of those physical processes, is also part of the physical process. But nonetheless, there's a cart before a horse here that there's only one way this goes. One comes before the other. There's either a self observing all this stuff, or there is matter that gives rise to the self observing all this stuff. We tend to want to think that I am a self here, separate and distinct from this matter. That's generally how we're raised, especially in American society. And yet, I look for this self and I do not find it. Just in the experience that's arising right now, I don't find this self. And yes, I use language like I, and here I am looking. There's an I here. Because it's baked into our language, right? This is how our language is utilized, has been utilized, how it's been developed from this perspective of being a self separate and distinct from the universe. And that's been very useful, right? It is useful to consider yourself a self over here and another person over there, and that person knows where you are and you know where they are. And now we can take down the woolly mammoth and we can survive. So having these genetic codings for a brain that is capable of making these distinctions between a self and another is a very useful thing. But when we try to navigate that concept on its own terms, which I don't fully understand what I mean by that yet, but when we look at the concept of self and ask, what is it referencing? What is it in reference to? It breaks down pretty quickly. From a first person perspective, from a third person perspective, I might call this a self. A third person might look at me and say, you are a you are what you are, I see you, you are as you are. And yet, I'm not, right? Like, I'm not one thing. I'm not a person. I'm not a singular thing, a singular solid thing for which we can nail down and say that's the self. And if we recognize what we're doing, we're conceptualizing this thing called self and overlaying it onto a collection of things. We are defining, we are balkanizing, we are creating the boundaries around a part of the universe and giving it a name, self or you or that over there. But the ship of Theseus is a word. I'd recommend looking that up. Mereology is another word. That's an important one to look up. When we try to find what is necessary and sufficient for somebody to be a person or a self to be a self, we start peeling back the layers on an onion and eventually find that there is no core here, that eventually you just don't have any more onion. And so there was no thing amidst the onion that made the onion the onion. Each layer was a layer, and you could remove that layer, and we'd still call it an onion. Keep peeling back these layers, and eventually there's just nothing there. And this is an experience that you can go through practice of meditation on one hand, but also just through empirical investigation of your experience right now. Like, there are multiple parts. I could define concepts and start overlaying them onto different parts of my experience. Say, I notice the sounds of my voice. I notice this next word coming out of my mouth. I notice the visual field of which there are different colors, different things to observe. And I can call this all, I can balkanize this experience into multiple slices and different little things. Or I could try to recognize, what does it mean to understand this experience as multiple things and see that itself is a conceptualization. And if I relax that machinery, everything just is without slicing and dicing. That the slicing and dicing of things into conceptual components is a process that is not necessary. Necessary for what? Exactly. What? This is the necessary for the goal. The goal we haven't defined yet. The place in which a goal could arise and be understood conceptually. I do not need to conceptualize this. This happens. I do not need to conceptualize my hunger. When I'm hungry, I eat. I do not need to conceptualize my sleepiness. When I'm tired, I sleep. Conceptualization is an additional process amidst all the other processes that are ongoing in this experience right now. Or it's not an additional process at all. It is just the process. There is no separation between the visual field, the auditory signals, the moving of the body. All of it is just happening right now. Remove this conceptualization and balkanization, and suddenly there is no self. There is no distinction between that which is is. There's no distinction between that which is and there's nothing to put at the end of that sentence. It's just as a matter of empirical investigation of the first person experience, there is no space to put, and then there's me behind the eyes looking at all of this. There's just all of this. And I think if you were to engage in a similar meditative, I don't know, into the same inquiry, into the same investigation into your own experience, and notice I am now dualistically saying the you and the experience here, which is the thing I'm trying to call into question. Say, is there really a you and the experience, or is there just the experience? I think not only can this be understood conceptually, rationally, it can be understood experientially, just as you experientially know how to move your arm. I do not conceptually know how to move my arm. It just do. I do not know how it is that I see things. It just do. I do not know how the sense of there being a self in the middle of this organic machine do. It used to do, but now it don't. Now I don't see the referent of the concept of self. And I think that's it, it's a really good thing. It's a lot better. It satisfies many of the conceptual issues that I was running into. I'm not going to be able to bring up an example again here, but issues regarding a rational picture as to what is happening that is consistent across all domains. There always seem to be gaps and discontinuities here and there, and I never enjoyed that. And so I've spent my entire life really trying to develop a consistent rational picture of literally everything. And I've more or less succeeded as far as I can tell. Because in my success, I recognize, like, success to me is the recognition that there will never be success. That is success. Success to me this is one of the contradictory things that you can do with concepts, but the point is to refer to both of these successes, the success that is the non-success, and see that they're pointing at two different things, two different successes, right? There's a success within a particular standard that we all decide is what is a standard of success. And then there's a success that doesn't have a standard to answer to, because success is recognizing that what is and is not success is a conceptualized balkanization that is something that you and other people bring to the table, and it's either believed or it isn't. Success. We've just seen through everything. So we have success, and our success is recognizing that we are going to fail that over and over and over again. That we are going to create standards that are either successful or not. And that is a very good and useful thing to do. That we will define what is a successful scientific theory based on standards that help us to understand the world, not in this way, but in the conceptualization way. And there's nothing wrong with that conceptualization process. There's a footprint on the moon because of that conceptualization process. It is a useful and good thing, and we shouldn't be upset about the fact that we might confuse our concepts for ourselves. But we're going to do it. We're going to get lost in our own stories about who and what we are. It's just part of it. It's just part of having this very powerful abstracting machine up here. And it's okay. It's not Getting upset with it is, again, another conceptualization about something that doesn't exist anymore. Or ever existed, potentially. I don't know. Success, not success. Conceptualization. You always have success. It's always available because you're always capable of noticing that you are conceptualizing and noticing when you're not conceptualizing and noticing when you have been taken in by a story, by a set of concepts, and noticing when you transcend those concepts and recognize that it's just here for now and then it'll be gone. If you don't understand what I'm saying, it's still available to understand. Your success in understanding what I'm saying or non understanding what I'm saying is not dependent on a standard that I can hand you, a standard that anybody can hand you, a standard that you can hand yourself on some level. Because if you are comparing your ability to understand what I'm saying based on a standard, you're looking for a conceptual framework to make sense of what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is explicitly, these are the wrong tools for the job. That recognizing non-conceptualization is success. Recognizing that you are conceptualizing is success. Recognizing that there is no way to not be successful is success. And that non-success can only be understood within a particular standard and framework that you set up and decide is or is not successful. And this recognition is extraordinarily useful for putting a footprint on the moon, because that is the definition of what is success within that space. Is there a footprint on the moon or not? That's how we decide whether or not our efforts towards creating a rocket and sending people up there was successful. No, that's not how it is. It also depends on them getting back, of course, but like, there we go. We just continually refine and define the standard as to what we define, as to what is success. And we recognize that each step here, each conceptualization as to what success is just that, just another conceptualization. And we can't capture the entirety of it within a concept or within a set of concepts. We can only divide it into little pieces and say one thing at a time. So it's necessarily going to leave stuff out. So when I say that is success, it's like, well, okay, like there's other stuff, obviously, but I can't, it's not useful for me to be talking about that right now. The success that I have defined for myself right now as to whether or not I make sense in what I'm saying in this video is not dependent on my getting every last little conceptual notion as to what success is with respect to the landing on the moon. It's to point out that that is the framework that there is a framework there at all that we're using to define success. And that we may also be doing that with respect to understanding the words that are coming out of my mouth right now. Another understanding is that there is no understanding here. There is nothing to understand. There's just this unfolding moment. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to do anything right now to understand the English language. You just understand it. It just happens. It just do. It just do. I think that's about it. Conceptualization. Standards. Ideas. Duality, non-duality. This is an exercise in thinking conceptually as opposed to the non-conceptual thinking, which is, I don't think that's a thing. Of course that's a thing. I just thought it. Yeah, that's about it. Conceptualization is useful. It's less useful when we fail to distinguish the map from the territory and we get lost in the concepts and we decide on a very particular standard that we may or may not live up to in our personal lives, in what we decide is or is not a proper understanding of something, in anything that you do. Understanding what understanding is a very useful thing. Because it allows you to inspect the assumptions that you might have been operating on this entire time as you entered into a discipline without even realizing you entered into a discipline that takes on a whole host of assumptions that went unexpected by the discipline, went uninspected by you because nobody within the discipline inspected them. And it's not just science that everything I'm saying right now applies to. It's acknowledging the fact that we all, by default at birth, are entered into a discipline that operates on a set of assumptions. We're all born into countries and societies and cultures that all have their own assumptions, and they're all going to either go inspected or not. And so for us to come together as a human civilization to recognize our common humanity, we need a common framing of everything. Otherwise, there is no commonality. We need an epitome, this is what everything is. People try this with concepts like God, but they generally fail. They fail the rationality test. I don't want to say what I'm doing is God. I don't think that, because it's like God, I don't really want to talk about God right now. It's a term with so much baggage. But I would note, I would suggest, if you'd be willing to come along with me, that God is another conceptualization. Whatever it is that I'm doing right now is another conceptualization. It's also not a conceptualization. It's also just, here we are. All right, that's all for now. Thank you.